Linda found herself sitting across from Marcus at their old favourite restaurant, a place that had witnessed many of their college escapades and heartfelt conversations years ago. As they exchanged stories and laughed over shared memories, she couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia. The connection between them was palpable, stirring feelings of excitement and apprehension within her. The dinner was supposed to be just a casual catch-up, but as the evening progressed, it turned into something more profound, a rekindling of a friendship she had long missed. Marcus, ever the charismatic and attentive listener, seemed to understand her in ways that Derek hadn't in years. His career as an author had taken off, bringing with it a life of travel and stories, so different from her daily routines that often felt more suffocating than comforting. As he spoke about his adventures and the people he had met along the way, Linda felt a part of her awaken, a part that had been subdued by the monotony of suburban life and the cold distance that had grown in her marriage. Derek, her husband, had always been more reserved, his affections often masked by a need for control that Linda had slowly come to resent. Lately, Derek's caring nature seemed overshadowed by his suspicion, often leaving Linda to wonder whether his love was contingent on her remaining the predictable spouse he wanted her to be. This control had extended to subtle checks on her whereabouts, casual glances at her phone, and questions that seemed more like interrogations. As the night wore on, Linda and Marcus found themselves closing down the restaurant, lost in conversation. There was an ease between them, a familiarity that felt both comforting and exhilarating. Marcus invited her to continue their chat at his place, promising a cup of his infamous late-night coffee and the chance to see his new book collection. The invitation was innocent enough, yet it sparked a thrill in Linda that she hadn't expected. Driving to Marcus's apartment, Linda felt a mix of guilt and defiance. She knew that Derek would disapprove, but the thought of going home to another silent evening filled her with a sense of dread. With Marcus, she could be herself, laugh freely, and speak her mind without fear of judgment or reprisal. This night, she told herself, was about reclaiming a piece of her identity that she had neglected, not about betraying Derek. But the distinction was murky, complicated by the emotions that Marcus's presence stirred within her. Arriving at Marcus's place, the warmth and richness of his apartment, filled with books and artifacts from his travels, enveloped her. They talked for hours, Marcus sharing stories behind each book and artifact, drawing her into his world. As the night deepened, so did their conversation, turning to more personal subjects like their aspirations, fears, and the inevitable what-ifs that accompanied their current life choices. Linda found herself sharing more than she had intended, her words flowing freely in the safety of Marcus's understanding presence. She spoke of her loneliness, the emotional disconnect with Derek, and how she felt more like a fixture in her own home than a partner. Marcus listened, offering the kind of empathy and understanding that she had been craving. There was no judgment, only the warmth of genuine concern. As the clock ticked toward morning, the realization of what she was doing began to sink in. She was physically just talking and sharing coffee, but emotionally she was venturing into dangerous territory. It was one thing to reconnect with an old friend, but another to find solace in his company, while her marriage continued to crumble. The line between emotional fidelity and betrayal was becoming blurred. Linda knew that staying the night, even without any physical infidelity, would be a breach of trust if Derek ever found out. But as she looked around at Marcus's cozy living room, listened to the soft music playing in the background, and felt the warmth from the fireplace, she made a decision. Tonight, she would stay, not out of spite for Derek or out of any misguided hope for romance with Marcus, but for herself, to feel alive, appreciated and understood, even if just for a night. This decision, fraught with moral ambiguity, marked a significant shift in her life, one that would inevitably lead to consequences she couldn't yet foresee. Morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow that illuminated the room. Linda stirred, the comfort of the deep conversation from the night before still wrapped around her like a warm blanket. But as consciousness took hold, so did reality. She glanced at the clock, its digits a stark reminder of the time that had slipped by, hours spent in a world that felt separate from her everyday life. Her heart sank as she realized the implications of the night, not just the physical act of staying away from home, but what it symbolized about her state of mind and the current state of her marriage. Her phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand, a sharp contrast to the peaceful ambience of Marcus's apartment. With a hesitant hand, she reached for it, each vibration a pulse of dread. The screen lit up to reveal a cascade of messages from Derek, each one more frantic and accusatory than the last. "Where are you? Why aren't you answering? What's going on, Linda?" The progression of his texts painted a picture of a night filled with worry, doubt, and anger. She winced as she scrolled through them, each word a weight added to her already heavy heart. Linda sat up, pressing her hands to her temples as she tried to piece together a response. She had not physically cheated, but she couldn't shake the feeling of guilt, knowing that her emotional absence was as significant as a physical one. The space between her and Derek had grown over the years, filled with silence instead of dialogue, distance instead of intimacy. Last night had been a breach of trust, albeit not the kind people usually accuse their spouses of in heated arguments or tearful confessions. She got up and began to gather her things, her movements mechanical. The room, filled with Marcus's personal touches and the remnants of their long night of sharing, suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Marcus, who had been understanding and a comforting presence just hours before, was now a reminder of the complexity and potential fallout of her decisions. As she prepared to leave, Marcus emerged from the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee, unaware of the storm brewing just beyond the walls of his apartment. He offered her a cup, his smile fading as he took in her expression, her furrowed brow, her forced smile. "Is everything okay?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "I need to go home," Linda said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "There's a lot I need to sort out." Marcus nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of concern and understanding. He didn't press her for details, he simply extended a hand, placing it gently on her shoulder in a gesture of support. Driving back, Linda's mind raced as she rehearsed what she would say to Derek. How could she explain the unexplainable? That her night away was not about infidelity, but about seeking a connection, a semblance of understanding that she felt was missing at home. That it was more about finding herself than about finding someone else. The familiar streets that led to her house looked different that morning, as if she was seeing them for the first time. As she pulled into the driveway, the sight of her home, with all its contained memories and shared history, made her heart ache. She sat in the car for a moment, gathering her courage, preparing to face the consequences of her actions. Stepping inside, she found Derek in the living room, his posture tense, his expression a mix of relief and anger. The air was thick with unsaid words, the distance between them more profound than the physical space. Linda took a deep breath, ready to bridge the gap with truth, regardless of where it might lead. Her next words would be the most difficult she had ever spoken, but necessary if there was any hope of mending the broken trust, of healing the wounds in their marriage, or of parting ways with a clear conscience. She began with the hardest admission. I stayed with a friend last night because I needed some space to think. Each word felt like lifting weights, heavy with the burden of her inner conflict, and the potential to either start mending their relationship or to finalize its unraveling. The morning air felt unusually crisp as I walked through the door, the familiar creaks and groans of the house now seeming to punctuate the tension that awaited. Derek was sitting on the couch, an unreadable expression plastered across his face, his eyes flicking to the clock, then back to me as I entered. The atmosphere was charged, a palpable mix of relief and impending confrontation hanging between us. Before I could speak, Derek's voice cut through the silence, sharp and accusing. "Where were you last night?" His question was direct, his tone laced with a mixture of hurt and suspicion that made me pause. "I know you weren't with any colleagues," he added, his voice rising slightly in anger and frustration. Feeling cornered, I responded defensively. "I just needed some time alone, Derek. I needed to think." But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they sounded hollow, inadequate for the gravity of the situation. Derek's face hardened as he pulled out his phone, tapping on it a few times before turning the screen towards me. Displayed on it was a map, a glaring red line marking my movements from the previous evening. "You call sitting in Marcus's apartment all night thinking," he challenged, the pain evident in his voice now mixed with a sense of betrayal. I stood frozen, the image on the screen searing into my mind. The fact that Derek had tracked me, that he had invaded my privacy to this extent, left me feeling violated and angry. "You put a spy app on my phone," I managed to say, my voice a mix of disbelief and outrage. "Yes, I did," Derek shot back, standing up now, his body tense. "Because I knew something was going on. You're never home, you're always distracted, and now I find you with him." His accusations felt like blows, each one underscoring how far apart we had drifted. The room felt smaller, the air thicker as emotions ran high. "Derek, you don't trust me, and now you're spying on me. How do you think we can have a marriage without trust?" My own anger was rising now, not just at the breach of privacy, but at the years of emotional disconnect that had brought us here. Derek's expression shifted from anger to pain, his stance softening slightly. "I don't know what to think, Linda. I felt like I was losing you, and I didn't know what else to do." His voice broke, revealing the vulnerability beneath his initial fury. The confrontation seemed to reach a boiling point, with hurt feelings on both sides threatening to overshadow the deeper issues at play. "Derek, I'm sorry I wasn't honest about where I was going, but I felt suffocated. I needed space to breathe, to figure out what I want from us, from our marriage," I said, my voice steadier now, trying to bridge the chasm of misunderstanding between us. Silence hung heavily in the room as Derek sat back down, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I don't want to lose you, Linda, but I don't know how to fix this if we can't even talk without secrets and lies," he said quietly, the fight gone from his voice. The emotional fallout was clear. We were at a crossroads with the path forward uncertain and fraught with potential pain. It was a moment of profound realization for both of us that our marriage had been unraveling not just this night but over months and years of neglect and miscommunication. "I think we need help, Derek." "We can't do this on our own," I suggested softly, the idea of counselling now seeming like the only lifeline left to salvage the remnants of our relationship. Derek nodded slowly, the resistance in his posture easing as he met my gaze. "Maybe you're right. Maybe that's what it takes," he conceded, the first step taken towards a possible reconciliation or a mutual understanding of where we stood. As I stood there, looking at the man I had married, the complexity of love, trust and commitment never felt more real. The road to healing was going to be long and uncertain. Component placement, but the first faltering steps towards understanding and forgiveness had been taken, setting the stage for whatever was to come. Sitting at the kitchen table with cups of cold coffee between us, the early morning light began to filter through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. It was as if the new day was urging us to start fresh, to clear away the remnants of last night's stormy emotions and speak openly about what lay heavy on our hearts. "I've been feeling like you're not really here, even when you're sitting right next to me," I started, the words pouring out with a mix of relief and fear. "It's like you're so wrapped up in your work that there's no room left for me, for us." Derek listened, his face sombre, reflecting the gravity of our conversation. "I know I've been distant," he acknowledged. "I get so caught up in trying to provide everything I think we need that I've neglected the very foundation of our life together. I'm sorry, Linda. I didn't realize how much you were hurting." The honesty in his voice, a rare vulnerability that he seldom showed, touched a chord. "I miss us, Derek. I miss how we used to talk about everything, how you'd laugh at my jokes, even the bad ones. Now, it feels like there's this vast space between us that just keeps growing." Derek reached across the table, his hand tentatively covering mine. "I miss us too. I've been so afraid of not being enough, of failing you somehow, that I've pushed you away. But I'm here now, Linda. I'm here, and I want to make this work if you're willing." The contact, simple yet profound, reignited a spark of the connection we once shared. "I want to try, Derek, but we need more than just good intentions. We need to change how we communicate, how we connect. We can't keep going like this." "You're right," he agreed, squeezing my hand gently. "What about starting with counselling? We could use some guidance on how to rebuild what we've lost." Nodding, I felt a surge of hope, tempered with realism. Counselling is a start, but it's going to take effort from both of us every day. Are we ready to do that, to really commit to this, to each other? "I am," Derek said firmly. "Whatever it takes, Linda." "I don't want to lose you. I don't want to be the reason you feel alone." The conversation shifted slowly from airing grievances to discussing tangible steps forward. We talked about setting aside time each day just for us, whether it was a morning coffee together without our phones or a walk after dinner. We discussed the importance of being present, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well. "I also need you to trust me," I said, the earlier incident of the tracking app coming to mind. "Trust is foundational, Derek. Without it, we're just building on sand." Derek nodded solemnly. "I know, and I'll do better. The app is gone, I promise. I need to trust you and communicate, not spy and assume the worst." As the morning wore on, our conversation became less about the missteps and more about the future. It was as if, with each word exchanged, we were weaving a new tapestry, one threaded with hope and the willingness to mend our frayed edges. By the time we stood up from the table, the decision was clear. We were both committed to this path of healing, aware of its potential bumps, but willing to navigate it together. It wasn't just about avoiding the pain of separation, but about rediscovering the joy that had once defined us as a couple. The road ahead would require patience, understanding, and a lot of hard work. But as Derek and I cleared the table together, working in silent harmony, there was a sense of partnership that had been missing for too long. It was a small sign, perhaps, but in those moments small signs were enough to fuel the hope that what we were rebuilding could one day be stronger and more beautiful than what had been broken. Through the weeks of counselling, Derek and I learned to peel back the layers of our relationship, confronting uncomfortable truths and unpacked years of neglected communication. Each session was like turning the soil in a long untended garden, hard work, sometimes painful, but necessary for growth. We tackled everything from everyday communication breakdowns to deeper issues of trust and respect. With every conversation, it became clear that rebuilding trust wasn't just about what was said in those sessions. It extended into how we interacted at home, the small, everyday choices that demonstrated our commitment to each other. We began setting aside time each evening to share details of our day, deliberate moments where we could connect without distractions. This practice, initially awkward, gradually became a cherished part of our routine. Derek made an effort to leave work at a reasonable hour, prioritizing our time together over late nights at the office. I noticed the change in him, the way he began to open up about his fears and insecurities, things he had always kept close. I did my part too, making sure he felt appreciated at home, ensuring he knew that his efforts didn't go unnoticed. Meanwhile, I rekindled friendships that I had let slip away, including my friendship with Marcus. Derek knew that Marcus was part of my wider social circle, and this time our friendship was built on a transparent, open dialogue between Derek and me. Marcus and I met occasionally for coffee and group outings with mutual friends, always making sure Derek was comfortable with our plans. It was important to me that Derek saw these interactions not as threats, but as normal parts of my social life. As our trust rebuilt, so did our intimacy. There was a newfound depth to our relationship, a sense of knowing each other more fully than we had before. We learned not only to communicate, but to listen deeply, to hear not just words, but the emotions behind them. It wasn't always easy. There were days when old fears and insecurities surfaced, challenging our resolve. But now, instead of retreating into silence, we turned towards each other, using the tools we had learned in counselling. One evening, several months into our journey of rebuilding, we sat in our backyard watching the sunset. It was a warm, quiet night, the kind of peaceful moment that had once been common in our early days together. Derek reached for my hand, his touch gentle, familiar. "You know," he started, his voice reflective, "I used to think love was about grand gestures, about always being on the same page. But I've realized it's actually about being willing to turn the page together when things get tough." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "I agree. It's about growing together, isn't it? About building something stronger from the broken pieces." "Yes," Derek nodded, "and I'm grateful for that. Grateful for you and for us. For not giving up when it would have been easier to walk away." We sat in silence for a moment, both lost in our thoughts. I thought about the road we had travelled, the missteps, the pain, but also the healing and growth. It hadn't been easy, but here we were, stronger for it, our love deepened by the trials we had overcome. As the sky darkened and stars began to twinkle above, I felt a deep sense of peace. This journey had taught us both the value of perseverance, of honesty, and of hard work in love. Our relationship, once frayed and fragile, now felt secure, grounded in mutual respect and understanding. Looking ahead, I knew there would be more challenges, more opportunities for growth. But I also knew that we would face them together, as partners, with the strength of our renewed love to guide us. This wasn't just a new chapter in our lives. It was a renewed commitment to live our best lives together.